At Christmas, I brought gifts to my son's house, only to overhear my daughter-in-law and husband plotting to take my money and get rid of me. They didn't know I was there, hiding in plain sight. My heart froze, but my face remained calm. Their betrayal will not stand. Follow my story, like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. The crisp December air bit at Evelyn's cheeks, a welcome chill that invigorated her as she approached her son Michael's house. Her arms were laden with brightly wrapped packages, the ribbons and bows a cheerful burst of color against her winter coat. It was just a week before Christmas, and Evelyn, ever the early bird, had decided to deliver some of the more fragile gifts ahead of the holiday rush. She loved this time of year, the anticipation, the joy of giving, the warmth of family gatherings. This year felt particularly special, a quiet sense of contentment settling over her as she imagined Michael and his wife Victoria's delight at her thoughtfulness. Reaching the front door, she fumbled in her purse for the spare key they'd given her years ago, a testament to her unofficial role as the family's emergency contact and spontaneous visitor. She'd tried calling Victoria on her mobile twice on the drive over, but had gotten no answer. That was unusual for Victoria, who was usually glued to her phone. Michael's car wasn't in the driveway either, which was also odd for a weekday afternoon. He usually worked from home on Tuesdays. A slight frown creased Evelyn's brow. The house was unnervingly quiet, a stark contrast to the usual cheerful chaos of a home with a young couple. No music, no television, no sounds of movement. Thinking perhaps they were in the garden or had stepped out for a quick errand, she let herself in, the click of the lock echoing in the stillness. Michael? Victoria? It's just me, Evelyn. I brought the Christmas gifts early, she called out, her voice bright and expectant, anticipating the sudden appearance of her daughter-in-law. Perhaps flustered but always gracious. She began to set the packages down carefully on the polished console table in the foyer, arranging them artfully. Then, she heard it. A low murmur from upstairs. Victoria's distinctive voice, sharper than usual, cutting through the silence. Evelyn paused, one hand still on a silver-wrapped box. It wasn't just talking. It was hushed, conspiratorial, almost aggressive. Evelyn strained to listen, a prickle of unease starting to spread. She caught snippets, then a full sentence that stopped her cold. "The 3 million will be ours soon enough, I tell you," Victoria was saying, her voice laced with a predatory glee Evelyn had never heard before. Evelyn's breath hitched. The silver-wrapped box slipped from her grasp and clattered against the table. 3 million. The old woman, her mind, usually so quick and precise, struggled to connect the dots. A cold dread began to seep into her veins, her blood turning to ice. The old woman? Who could Victoria possibly be talking about? And 3 million? A specific, significant sum. Then, a sickening wave of realization washed over her. 3 million was the exact amount in the joint nest egg she shared with her husband, Richard. Funds they had meticulously saved over 37 years of marriage, intended for their comfortable retirement, their legacy for Michael. The old woman. It couldn't be. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Could it really be her? Victoria's voice continued, a chillingly calm cadence now. Richard's got it all figured out. Once she's gone, we won't have to pretend anymore. Pretend! The word hung in the air, a venomous echo in Evelyn's mind. Pretend what? Pretend to care? Pretend to be a loving daughter-in-law? Pretend to be a devoted husband? The pieces of the puzzle, grotesque and horrifying, began to snap into place. Her world tilted on its axis, the familiar warmth of her son's home suddenly feeling like a freezing tomb. A creak from the floorboards upstairs, followed by the soft padding of footsteps, jolted Evelyn back to the present. Someone was coming down. Her mind, in a flash of pure instinct, switched from terror to survival. She bent down quickly, fumbling with the packages as if she had just that moment entered. She straightened her posture, taking a deep, shaky breath, attempting to compose her features into her usual cheerful expression. The packages, however, now felt like lead weights in her trembling hands. Victoria rounded the corner from the staircase, her usually perfectly coiffed blonde hair slightly disheveled. Her designer blouse was a little askew, and her cheeks were flushed. But it wasn't just Victoria. Behind her, adjusting the collar of his shirt with an awkward, hurried gesture, was Richard. Richard. Evelyn's husband of 37 years. Evelyn stared, her breath catching in her throat. Her husband. Here. In their son's house, with their daughter-in-law, both looking rumpled and guilty, and he had just been talking about her. Plotting against her. A dizzying wave of nausea swept over Evelyn. Richard saw her, and his face, usually so composed and jovial, drained of all color. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost, his jaw dropping slightly. "Evelyn? What are you doing here?" He stammered, his voice thin and reedy, completely lacking his usual warmth. Victoria, ever the quick thinker, recovered almost instantly. She smoothed her hair, a practiced, saccharine smile, replacing the flicker of alarm on her face. "Oh, Evelyn, what a lovely surprise. I'm so sorry. My phone was on silent upstairs. Richard was just helping me move some heavy furniture around in the spare room. You know how clumsy I am with anything over 5 pounds." She laughed. A light, tinkling sound that now struck Evelyn as utterly false. Evelyn forced a smile. A brittle, fragile thing that felt like it might shatter her face. Her gaze, however, was fixed on Richard. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He kept looking at the floor, then at the wall, anywhere but at her. The air between them crackled with unspoken accusations, with a betrayal so profound it choked Evelyn. "I should get going," Richard muttered, avoiding her gaze entirely. He shuffled past Victoria, towards the front door, his movements jerky and unnatural. He didn't offer a kiss, not even a casual peck on the cheek he always gave her. Even when they'd only been apart for an hour, he just grabbed his coat, mumbled a barely audible, "See you later," and was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the frantic pounding of Evelyn's own heart. She stood there, the festive packages suddenly feeling like a mockery, her smile frozen in place as Victoria continued to prattle on about the imaginary furniture. But Evelyn heard nothing past the ringing in her ears, the echo of old woman and pretend. Somehow, she managed to feign a headache and make her excuses, gathering her packages and walking out the door with a polite farewell. The outside world, once so bright and promising, now felt like a stage set. The festive lights twinkling on neighborhood houses looked garish and fake, their cheer a cruel irony. She drove home in a daze, the familiar route, a blur of colors. Her mind replayed the overheard conversation, Richard's ghostly pale face, Victoria's practiced lies, her sanctuary, the home she had painstakingly built, the life she had devoted herself to, had crumbled into dust. It was gone, replaced by the horrifying realization that her own husband and her daughter-in-law were conspiring against her, plotting her demise for money. The profound sense of betrayal was a physical ache, a gaping wound in her chest. The night stretched endlessly, a dark, suffocating blanket. Evelyn lay rigid beside Richard, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was the sound of a man utterly at peace, a stark contrast to the tumultuous storm raging within her. Each inhale and exhale was a torment, a cruel reminder that the man sharing her bed, the man she had loved for nearly 4 decades, was capable of the most heinous betrayal. She replayed Victoria's words. "Richard says the old woman won't last much longer anyway." Then, Richard's own reaction, his pale, guilty face, the hurried escape, the missing kiss. It wasn't just a betrayal of vows, it was a plot against her very existence. The sheer magnitude of it left her breathless, a knot of icy fear tightening in her stomach. How could she have been so blind? The first rays of dawn brought no relief, only a chilling certainty that the nightmare was real. Richard stirred, then turned to her, his eyes fluttering open. A practiced smile spread across his face, a mask she now saw through with devastating clarity. "Good morning, my dear," he murmured, a hand reaching out to touch her arm. Evelyn flinched internally, fighting the urge to pull away. His touch, once a comfort, now felt repulsive. "How are you feeling this morning, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice laced with an unusual solicitousness. "You seemed a little off yesterday. Did you sleep well? Perhaps I should call Dr. Hayes, just to check in. He was asking about you the other day, you know. Wondered if you'd reconsidered those sleeping medications he prescribed." Evelyn's skin crawled. Dr. Hayes, their family physician, had indeed suggested mild sedatives a few months ago for some occasional sleeplessness, but Evelyn had declined, preferring natural remedies. Now, Richard's overly keen interest in her health, and specifically in those medications, struck her as deeply sinister. Why was my husband so interested in me taking sleeping medication? The question echoed in her mind, cold and clear. It was too easy to connect the dots. A sedated Evelyn would be less aware, less resistant, easier to manipulate, perhaps even easier to... Silence. Later that morning, as they sat over coffee, Richard brought up the subject again, but this time with a seemingly innocuous lead-in. "You know, Evelyn," he began, swirling his spoon in his mug. "Victoria called me this morning. She's really quite responsible for her age, always thinking ahead. She got me thinking about our own affairs. Perhaps we should review our insurance policies, just to make sure everything is in order. You know, to ensure you're adequately taken care of if something were to happen to me." He paused, then added, "And of course, for your sake too, if something were to happen to you." The words hung in the air, innocent to anyone else. But to Evelyn, they were a thinly veiled threat, a chilling preview of their dark intentions. "Taken care of," he'd said, in the same breath as if something happens. Her heart pounded, but she forced a calm smile. "That sounds perfectly sensible, Richard. I suppose it's never too early to be organized, is it?" It was almost as if on cue. That afternoon, Victoria called. Her voice, usually light and bubbly, now seemed to Evelyn to carry a false note of concern. "Evelyn, darling, I was just talking to Richard. He told me you two were considering reviewing your financials." "How absolutely brilliant. I've been meaning to suggest we all get together and discuss family business, wills, and some forward-thinking financial planning. Michael and I were hoping you could both join us for dinner tomorrow evening." My treat. Evelyn's stomach churned. This was it. The next step in their meticulously planned deception. A family dinner to finalize the details of her own undoing. Yet, her voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. "That sounds lovely, Victoria. We'd be delighted to come." As soon as she hung up, a cold resolve settled over Evelyn. Before she could face them, before she could even begin to process the horror of it all, she needed proof. Tangible, undeniable evidence. She walked purposefully to Richard's study, a room usually off-limits to her spontaneous cleaning sprees, a domain he fiercely guarded. Her hand trembled slightly as she approached his mahogany desk, a heavy, ornate piece where he kept all his important papers. She knew his habits, his quirks. He was meticulous, but also believed no one would ever dare to pry. She found it quickly, not in the obvious top drawer, but in a false bottom of a deeper one, concealed beneath a stack of old financial reports. Her fingers brushed against a thin, manila folder, unmarked. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pulled it out, her breath catching in her throat. Inside were photocopies, copies of their life insurance policies, several investment statements, bank account summaries. She scanned them quickly, her mind racing. And then, at the bottom of the folder, tucked beneath the official documents, she found it. A single sheet of notepaper, folded neatly in half. Richard's familiar, precise handwriting. Her eyes darted across the page, each word a hammer blow to her soul. Assets: life insurance $500K, investments $2. 8M. House, $400K, total $3. 7M. The numbers were all there, meticulously itemized. The sheer, cold calculation of it made her dizzy. This was the blueprint for her murder, disguised as a casual list of assets. Then she saw the second entry, scrawled below the assets, in a different ink. Darker, bolder, as if written with more force, more conviction. It was in Richard's hand, unmistakably. Natural causes. Heart attack, most likely. History of hypertension. No autopsy if handled correctly. The room spun. The floor seemed to drop away beneath her. Natural causes. Heart attack. Hypertension. No autopsy if handled correctly. The words screamed in her head, shattering the last vestiges of hope, the last shred of disbelief. This wasn't some abstract plot. It was a concrete, horrifying plan for premeditated murder. Her murder. And her own husband was charting the course, making sure it looked entirely legitimate. A wave of nausea washed over her, and Evelyn sank into Richard's leather armchair, the blood draining from her face. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped it. With trembling fingers, she snapped multiple photographs of the note, the policies, everything in the folder. This was her evidence. This was her fight for survival. That evening, as they shared a meal that felt like ash in Evelyn's mouth, Richard, completely oblivious to her discovery, calmly began to discuss Victoria's desire to get our affairs in order. He spoke with a casualness that was terrifying, as if they were planning a new rose garden, not her demise. Victoria thinks it's vital to have all our wishes documented, dear, he said, carving a piece of chicken. Especially with everything being so complex these days. Wills, trusts, power of attorney. Sensible, really. Evelyn nodded, forcing herself to participate, to smile, to pretend that her world hadn't just been irrevocably broken. Another sleepless night followed. Richard, again, slept soundly beside her. But this time, Evelyn's mind was not just reeling from betrayal. It was calculating, planning. Victoria's voice, her greed, her manipulation. It was clear she was the mastermind, the instigator, driving this macabre scheme. But what about Michael? Her son? Was he truly unaware of his wife and father's monstrous plot? Or was he, too, a willing participant in the plan to erase his own mother for $3.7 million? The thought was almost too unbearable to contemplate. But Evelyn knew, with a cold certainty, that she had to find out. The next morning, Evelyn made a call that severed her last connection to her old life. She reached out to Arthur Evans, a private investigator whose name she'd found through a discreet online search, recommended for his meticulousness and, more importantly, his absolute discretion. She knew, instinctively, that she couldn't involve the police yet. She needed irrefutable proof, not just suspicions that would be easily dismissed. Arthur Evans was a man in his late 50s, with kind, tired eyes and a surprisingly gentle demeanor for someone in his profession. He listened patiently as Evelyn, her voice steady despite the tremors within, laid out her horrifying discovery. When she finally produced her phone and showed him the photograph of Richard's handwritten note detailing her assets and the chilling suggestion of natural causes and no autopsy, Arthur's expression hardened. The weary kindness in his eyes was replaced by a grave seriousness. He studied the photograph for a long moment, then looked up at Evelyn, his gaze piercing. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, his voice low and firm. "This is extremely serious. It appears you're dealing with a clear intent to commit a crime, and a well-planned one at that. For now, you must act as normally as possible. Do not let them suspect you know anything. And, Mrs. Hartwell," he leaned forward, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper, "be very careful what you eat or drink, especially anything prepared by them." His words confirmed her worst fears, giving them a terrifying weight of professional confirmation. Evelyn felt a fresh wave of cold dread wash over her, but also a flicker of grim determination. She was not just a victim, she was a survivor. Her first assignment from Arthur was to gather more evidence, to understand the full scope of their deception. He suggested she observe Richard closely. The very next day, a Tuesday, Richard announced he was going to Michael's house to help him with some work in the garage. Evelyn, feigning interest in a new gardening book, subtly observed him leave, then slipped out minutes later, getting into her car. She followed at a safe distance, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and grim curiosity. Instead of turning towards Michael's familiar street, Richard drove straight past it, continuing for another 10 minutes, before pulling into the parking lot of the Marriott Hotel on the outskirts of town. Evelyn parked her car a few rows back, hidden by a delivery truck, her breath catching in her throat. She watched, her eyes narrowed. A few minutes later, Richard emerged from the hotel lobby. But he wasn't alone. By his side, her arm tucked intimately through his, was Victoria. The sight was a brutal blow, striking Evelyn harder than any physical pain. The easy familiarity, the way Victoria leaned into Richard, the way he seemed to bask in her attention. It wasn't just friendly, not just familial. It was the undeniable intimacy of lovers. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile this image with the man she had called husband for 37 years. They stopped just outside the hotel entrance, laughing softly about something. Victoria then turned to Richard, rising on her tiptoes. She kissed him. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, not a dutiful daughter-in-law's embrace, but a real kiss. A lover's kiss. Long, lingering, undeniably passionate. Right there, in broad daylight, for anyone to see. Evelyn's world shattered. The pieces of her life, already fractured by the murder plot, disintegrated completely. This wasn't just about money. It was about a profound, soul-deep betrayal, a cruel mockery of their marriage, their family, her husband and her daughter-in-law. Lovers, the disgust, the heartbreak, the sheer, visceral revulsion was overwhelming. She managed to start her car, to drive away from the hotel, but she didn't make it far. Pulling over to the side of a deserted road, Evelyn leaned out the door and vomited, the bitter taste in her mouth, a physical manifestation of the bile in her soul. She cried then, not just for the betrayal, but for the loss of her innocence, the demolition of everything she had held dear. The weekend dinner at Michael and Victoria's house loomed, a horrifying specter. It felt like walking into a trap, a meticulously laid snare. But Evelyn knew she had to go. She had to gather more evidence, to understand the depth of their depravity. She dressed carefully, a polite smile plastered on her face, a shield against the turmoil within. When Michael opened the door, his face lit up with a genuine smile. He pulled her into a warm hug, his arms strong and comforting. "Mom, you look beautiful tonight," he said, holding her at arm's length. For a fleeting second, a desperate, foolish hope sparked within Evelyn. Perhaps Michael was truly innocent. Perhaps he had no idea what his wife and father were planning. But the hope was quickly extinguished as Victoria emerged from the living room, stunning in a flowing crimson dress that seemed to shimmer with malicious intent. Her smile, as always, was perfectly poised, but her eyes held a predatory glint that Evelyn now recognized. "Evelyn, darling. So glad you could make it. Come in, come in. We have so much to discuss." Dinner was a blur of forced pleasantries and careful small talk, Evelyn meticulously avoiding any food. Victoria prepared herself. As dessert was cleared, Victoria, ever the orchestrator, clapped her hands together. "All right, family. Now for the exciting part. The family business Richard and I were telling you about." She produced a pristine manila folder, placing it ceremoniously on the table. Richard, looking significantly more at ease than he had at the Marriott, reached into the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. "These are just some revised will forms, Evelyn," he said, handing her a document. "Victoria thinks it's vital we have everything completely up to date and airtight." Evelyn took the papers, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She glanced at the top sheet, a will revision form, already filled out in Richard's unmistakable handwriting. Her eyes quickly scanned the clauses, her blood running cold as she found what she was looking for. A specific clause, carefully worded, buried halfway down the page. "In the event that my son, Michael Hartwell, predeceases both myself and my wife, Victoria Hartwell, all assets, real property, and investments shall irrevocably pass to Victoria Hartwell alone." Evelyn's breath hitched. If Michael predeceases both Richard and Victoria, it wasn't just her. They were planning to eliminate Michael too. Or, at the very least, they were ensuring that if Michael met an unfortunate accident, Victoria would inherit everything, leaving her and Richard to share the spoils. The implication was staggering, horrifying beyond measure. She looked up, her gaze steady. "These are very comprehensive," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "I'd like to have my own lawyer review these before I sign anything. You know, just to be thorough." The temperature in the room plummeted. Victoria's perfect smile became strained, almost brittle. Her eyes, usually so warm and inviting, turned cold and calculating, fixed on Evelyn with an intensity that promised retribution. The trap had been sprung, but Evelyn had not walked into it blindly. She had seen it coming. 987 words. The remainder of the dinner at Michael and Victoria's house was excruciatingly stilted. The vibrant energy that had earlier pulsed through the room, however artificial, had evaporated completely. Evelyn maintained her composure, a serene mask fixed firmly on her face, playing the part of the slightly fussy but ultimately compliant mother-in-law. But beneath the surface, a chilling understanding solidified. She was no longer a beloved family member. She was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. Victoria's eyes, though still holding a semblance of a smile, now possessed an unnerving glint, like a predator assessing its prey. As they left, Richard pulled Evelyn into a hug, but it was far from comforting. His grip was possessive, almost threatening, his voice a low, warning rumble against her ear. "We'll get those papers sorted out this week, Evelyn. No need to drag this out unnecessarily, is there?" The implication was clear. Delay would not be tolerated. The next day, Arthur Evans called. His voice was calm, but the gravity of his words sent shivers down Evelyn's spine. "Mrs. Hartwell, I have some preliminary findings. It appears your husband, Richard, and your daughter-in-law, Victoria, have been having an affair for approximately 2 years. They've been meeting twice a week, usually at the Marriott, sometimes at Michael's house when he's at work." The confirmation of the affair, while expected after Evelyn's observation, still landed like a fresh blow. 2 years. 2 years of deceit, of mockery, of building a life of lies right under her nose. Evelyn felt a familiar wave of nausea, but she pushed it down. She had to stay focused. "That's not the worst part. Mrs. Hartwell," Arthur continued, his voice dropping slightly. "Richard has accrued over $400,000 in gambling debts. To some very unpleasant people, I might add. People who are not known for their patience. He's under immense pressure." Evelyn gasped, a sharp, involuntary sound. Gambling debts. Over $400,000. This explained the desperation, the urgency, the cold calculation in Richard's note. He wasn't just greedy, he was cornered, an animal lashing out to survive. The $3 million wasn't just a comfortable sum. It was his lifeline, his escape from a very dangerous predicament. "And there's more," Arthur pressed on. "It also appears Victoria has been systematically alienating Michael from you, making excuses for why he couldn't call, why he was too busy, intercepting your calls to him when he wasn't home. She created a wedge, isolating him from you, making it easier to control the narrative." This revelation hit Evelyn almost as hard as the affair. To separate her from her own son, to twist his affections and trust. It was a cruel and insidious form of emotional warfare. The thought of Michael being manipulated, perhaps even unknowingly involved, gnawed at her. "There's one more thing, Mrs. Hartwell," Arthur said, his voice now grim. "Your daughter-in-law has been researching untraceable poisons online. Specifically, substances that mimic heart attacks or strokes and are difficult to detect during a standard autopsy." Evelyn's vision blurred. The phone slipped slightly in her trembling hand. Untraceable poisons, mimicking heart attacks. No autopsy if handled correctly. Richard's note, Arthur's findings. It all converged into a horrifying tableau. They weren't just planning her murder, they were finalizing the method. And they were planning to act soon. Before Christmas, the joyful holiday she cherished, now tainted by the specter of her own impending demise. Every solicitous gesture from Richard, every concerned glance, every casual inquiry about her health now felt like a sinister countdown to her execution. Each day, she felt the invisible net tightening around her. Arthur confirmed her fears. "Richard is desperate, Mrs. Hartwell. These people he owes money to. They don't take kindly to delays. They likely plan to act within a week or two, possibly even sooner. to clear his debts before Christmas. Just as Arthur had predicted the urgency, Victoria's call came the very next day. Her voice was sugar-sweet, dripping with an artificial warmth that made Evelyn's stomach clench. "Evelyn, darling, how about we have another little dinner this weekend? Just us and Richard. I'm making your favorite lasagna. And would you be a dear and bring that wonderful bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon you served last Thanksgiving?" Richard absolutely raved about it. Evelyn felt a cold certainty wash over her. Lasagna. Her favorite wine. Richard's enjoyment of that particular bottle. It was too perfect. The wine. It was the intended delivery method. They were going to poison her through the wine, making it seem like a festive, harmless gesture. Her very own bottle, brought from her own home, to be shared amongst them, a perverse twist on family tradition. Her voice, however, remained calm. "Of course, Victoria. That sounds lovely. I'll bring the wine." As soon as she hung up, Evelyn called Arthur. She relayed the new invitation, the specific request for the wine. His response was immediate and urgent. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is too dangerous. We need to go to the police. Now. We have enough to present a very strong case." But Evelyn hesitated. A crucial piece of the puzzle was still missing, a question that tormented her more than her own impending doom. "Arthur," she said, her voice strained. "I need to know about Michael. Is he involved? Does he know what they're planning?" Arthur paused. "It's hard to say definitively, Mrs. Hartwell. Victoria has done a very thorough job of isolating him and controlling his interactions. It's possible he's a naive pawn, kept in the dark, or even a secondary target once you're out of the way, as that will clause suggests. But we don't have direct evidence of his complicity." "Then I can't go to the police yet," Evelyn insisted, a new resolve hardening her tone. "I need to confirm his innocence. I can't let him get caught in this mess if he's not guilty." Arthur sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "All right, Mrs. Hartwell. But you have to be incredibly careful. One wrong step, and—" He didn't finish the sentence. But Evelyn understood. That evening, Richard surprisingly took on the role of a doting husband. He made Evelyn's favorite meal, a delicate salmon with roasted asparagus, a dish he rarely prepared. He opened a bottle of her usual table wine, not the special Cabernet. As they sat down, candlelight flickering between them, he raised his glass, his eyes seemingly sincere. "To us, Evelyn," he said, his voice soft, almost tender. "To 37 wonderful years." Evelyn raised her glass, clinking it gently against his. She smiled, a carefully constructed facade. But inside, a chilling thought echoed. "To me, Richard, to the end of my life, which you are so eagerly anticipating." If you're gripped by Evelyn's harrowing journey, don't miss a single twist. Make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to stay updated. Your support helps me share these incredible stories. Now, back to Evelyn's fight for survival. The wine Richard poured that evening, Evelyn's usual table wine, had a faint, almost imperceptible bitterness that tightened her throat. It was subtle, easily dismissed as a trick of her anxious mind, but her senses were heightened, hyper-aware. She took only tiny sips, making a show of savoring it, while subtly encouraging Richard to drink more of his own glass, even offering a refill. He accepted, oblivious, a warm glow beginning to spread across his cheeks. Later, as they sat on the sofa, watching The Notebook, a movie they had seen countless times, Evelyn looked at the man beside her. He was laughing at a familiar scene, tears welling in his eyes at the romantic gestures on screen. To her, he was no longer Richard, her husband. He was a stranger, a masterful actor, a man planning her demise with chilling precision. The next morning, driven by a gnawing suspicion, Evelyn visited their bank. She requested a meeting with Miss Evans, their longtime personal banker. With a polite but firm request, she asked to review the activity on their joint accounts over the past few months. Miss Evans, a kind woman who had known Evelyn for years, looked increasingly uncomfortable as she scrolled through the digital ledger. "Evelyn," she said, her voice hesitant, Richard has systematically withdrawn nearly $200,000 from your joint savings and checking accounts over the last 6 months, in smaller increments, so as not to flag anything immediately. And another transfer, a large one, just last week, to an account I don't recognize. $200,000. Gone. Combined with the $400,000 in gambling debts, Richard was in a deep, dark hole. The confirmation sent a cold shiver down Evelyn's spine. It wasn't just the motive, it was the desperation, the calculated theft that fueled their murderous plot. Leaving the bank, Evelyn made her next move. She went to a specialized wine merchant and purchased an identical bottle of the Cabernet Sauvignon Victoria had requested, the exact vintage Evelyn had served last Thanksgiving. From there, she drove directly to the private lab Arthur Evans had recommended. Dr. Park, a meticulous-looking chemist with an air of quiet professionalism, took the bottle. "We'll analyze this for any unusual substances," he explained, his gaze direct. "But Mrs. Hartwell, I must reiterate, if you suspect someone is trying to harm you, especially with poison, you should really contact the police." Evelyn simply nodded, offering a strained smile. She still had to be sure about Michael. The day of the dinner arrived, heavy with an almost palpable tension. Evelyn moved through her routine, her mind a whirlwind of fear and grim determination. She carefully chose her outfit, a deep emerald green cocktail dress, elegant and timeless. It was the dress Michael had always said was his favorite, the one she'd worn for his law school graduation. A symbolic gesture, a silent plea for his innocence, a reminder of the bond they once shared. She prepared the requested wine bottle, a carefully selected replica from her cellar, ensuring it was exactly as Victoria would expect. Richard was unusually good-humored on the drive to Michael and Victoria's house. He hummed along to the radio, made light jokes, and chatted about trivial neighborhood gossip. His jovial facade was almost convincing, but Evelyn's heightened senses detected the subtle tells. The way he kept checking his watch, the white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. He was nervous, excited, anticipating the culmination of his plans. Michael greeted them at the door, his smile genuinely warm. He pulled Evelyn into a heartfelt hug, a comforting gesture that made her momentarily forget the horrors she was facing. "Mom, Dad, so glad you're here. Come in. Victoria's just finishing up in the kitchen." Evelyn studied his face, searching for any flicker of deceit, any sign of knowledge or complicity. But she saw only genuine pleasure at their arrival, and a subtle weariness around his eyes, perhaps from long hours at work. He seemed innocent, oblivious. The thought strengthened her resolve. Then Victoria appeared, emerging from the kitchen like a vision. She was radiant in a sleek black cocktail dress, her hair perfectly styled, her eyes sparkling with an unnerving intensity. "Evelyn, darling, Richard," she swept towards them, her gaze immediately falling on the wine bottle Evelyn held. "Ah, the famous Cabernet. And you brought the wine. Wonderful." She took the bottle from Evelyn's hand with a triumphant flourish, her fingers brushing Evelyn's with a chilling coldness. "It's a rather expensive vintage," Victoria purred, examining the label with an almost possessive air. "Let me take this to the kitchen. It needs to breathe properly, before we can truly appreciate it." She turned and glided away, the bottle held aloft like a trophy, disappearing into the kitchen. Evelyn watched her go, a profound sense of unreality settling over her. She felt like she was on a stage set, playing a role in a macabre play, the guest of honor at her own funeral. Every smile, every word, every gesture felt meticulously orchestrated, a performance designed to lead her to her death. They settled into the living room, Michael making polite conversation. He was, as always, eager to talk about his work. "I'm handling this estate case right now, a truly twisted situation. Relatives literally fighting tooth and nail over money. It's disgusting. People do terrible things to each other over inheritance." He paused, catching Evelyn's eye. "It just makes you appreciate what we have, you know? A loving, stable family." Evelyn's heart ached. Michael's innocent words, meant to express his appreciation, were a cruel echo of the reality she faced. He had no idea how terribly close to home his casual observation struck. He was a good man, her son, and she had to protect him. The kitchen doors swung open, and Victoria re-emerged, a triumphant smile gracing her lips. In one hand, she carried a tray laden with 4 sparkling wine glasses. In the other, the opened bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, the very one Evelyn had brought. "The wine is breathing beautifully," she announced, her voice honeyed. She moved gracefully, pouring a generous measure into each glass, even handing one to Evelyn first. As she did so, Evelyn subtly observed her. Victoria barely touched her own glass after offering a toast to family and festive seasons, taking only a tiny, almost symbolic sip. Richard, on the other hand, drained half his glass with gusto, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. About 10 minutes later, Evelyn felt a familiar wave of dizziness wash over her. Her tongue seemed to thicken, and her vision blurred at the edges. A cold dread, a primal fear, gripped her. Was it already working? Had they put something in the air, or on the glasses? "Are you feeling all right, Mom?" Michael's voice cut through her growing unease. "You look a little pale." Evelyn's head snapped up. She looked first at Richard, then at Victoria. In their eyes, she saw it. A flicker of anticipation, a hint of satisfaction, quickly masked, but unmistakably present. And then, in a sudden, blinding flash of clarity, Evelyn understood. The dizziness, the thick tongue, the slight blurring of vision. It wasn't from poison. It was from the sheer, overwhelming devastation of their betrayal, the emotional impact of sitting there, witnessing their monstrous plan unfold. Because she had switched the bottles. The wine Victoria had opened was not the one she had brought from home. That bottle, the suspected poisoned one, was safely tucked away in the trunk of her car, waiting for Dr. Park's analysis. The wine they were now drinking was an ordinary, unadulterated bottle from her own collection, replaced in Michael's kitchen minutes before Victoria had returned. A surge of relief, followed by an equally powerful wave of cold fury, coursed through Evelyn. They had done it. They had fully intended to poison her. "I just need to steady myself," Evelyn managed, her voice a little shaky, a performance already beginning. "Perhaps I'll just step into the bathroom for a moment." She rose, making sure to sway slightly, gripping the back of her chair for a moment, before slowly making her way out of the living room. Once inside the bathroom, she locked the door. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and newfound resolve. She had to sell this. She had to convince them without causing Michael to panic and call an ambulance, which would expose her hand too soon. She practiced, tilting her head, letting her eyes glaze slightly, exaggerating the pallor. She took a deep breath, pushing down the surge of emotions. This wasn't just about survival. It was about justice. When she returned, she made a show of swaying slightly, placing a hand against the doorframe for support. "Just a little lightheaded," she murmured, her voice sounding weak. "Must be all the excitement of the holiday season, I suppose." Richard and Victoria exchanged a quick, furtive glance, a look of barely concealed satisfaction passing between them. The corners of Victoria's lips twitched upward in a smug, almost imperceptible smile. Michael, ever the concerned son, immediately rose. "Mom, maybe we should just skip dinner. You really don't look well." But Victoria, ever the orchestrator, quickly interjected, her voice firm. "Nonsense, Michael. Evelyn just needs some good food in her. Starvation will only make her worse." She gave Evelyn a saccharine smile. "Come, Evelyn. Dinner is ready. It's your favorite lasagna." For the next hour, Evelyn gave the performance of her lifetime. She picked at her food, barely managing a few bites, her stomach churning with disgust. Not illness. She complained of nausea, pressing a hand to her forehead. She stumbled slightly when walking, feigning disorientation, her movements slow and deliberate. Richard and Victoria watched her like hawks, their eyes gleaming with a mixture of concern and barely contained glee. Michael, however, was genuinely distressed, frequently asking if she needed anything, offering to drive her home. The meal, what little of it Evelyn consumed, finally ended. Richard, ever the concerned husband, took his cue. "Evelyn," he said, his voice laced with feigned worry, "I think I should take you to see Dr. Hayes first thing tomorrow morning. These dizzy spells are concerning, and you've been looking a little under the weather for a few days now." Evelyn weakly nodded, her acting impeccable. "Maybe you're right, Richard," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I haven't been feeling quite myself lately." The words were a confirmation of their plan, a silent acknowledgement that she was falling into their trap. She knew Dr. Hayes was part of their scheme, a willing or unwitting participant in diagnosing her natural cause of death. The drive home was quiet, filled with the unspoken tension of a family on the precipice of tragedy. Evelyn leaned back against the headrest, her eyes closed, playing the part of a woman shutting down, succumbing to an unknown illness. But behind her closed eyelids, her mind was furious, alight with a cold, clear determination. The game was on, and she was ready to play. The morning after the disastrous dinner, Evelyn woke with a chilling clarity. The dizziness, the faux illness. It had bought her time. Now, she had to use it. She called her office, feigning a lingering malaise, and informed them she wouldn't be coming in. Instead, she drove directly to the law office of Eleanor Vance, a formidable estate attorney known for her sharp intellect and meticulous attention to detail. Eleanor, a woman with keen, intelligent eyes, listened intently as Evelyn, with a surprising calmness, laid out the entire, horrifying story. Evelyn showed her the photographs of Richard's note, explained the affair, the gambling debts, the attempts at poisoning, and the revised will clause. "I need to protect Michael," Evelyn stated firmly, cutting off Eleanor's immediate suggestion to involve the police. "I believe he's innocent. Manipulated by Victoria. I can't risk him being implicated in any way until I have absolute proof of their guilt and his lack of involvement." Eleanor nodded, her expression grim. "Very well, Mrs. Hartwell. We will proceed with caution." Evelyn then instructed her to make immediate and drastic changes to her will. "Everything," she declared, "must go to Michael. And I want specific, ironclad language included. If Victoria is found to be involved in my death in any way, or if she and Michael divorce within 5 years of my passing, she is to be completely disinherited." Next, Evelyn instructed Eleanor to establish a living trust, systematically removing Richard's access to all their joint accounts and investments, except for a minimal amount he could access for daily expenses, effectively cutting off his lifeline to their shared wealth. The bulk of their assets would flow into the trust, with Michael as the sole beneficiary, managed by Eleanor. Finally, Evelyn dictated a detailed, exhaustive account of everything she knew. The affair, Richard's gambling debts, Victoria's research into poisons, the staged dinner, the suspicious will, the specific threats, and her own fears for her life. This document, accompanied by the photographic evidence, was to be sealed in an envelope, to be opened only if something unfortunate were to happen to her. It was her insurance policy, her voice from beyond the grave. Leaving Eleanor's office, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over Evelyn. She had created a formidable paper trail. But she wasn't done. Richard would expect her to see Dr. Hayes. She made an appointment for 10 a.m. the following day, a necessary step in her performance. Then, discreetly, she made a second, secret appointment. This one was with Dr. Eleanor Evans, a respected cardiologist, and, crucially, Arthur Evans's sister. Arthur had already briefed his sister on the situation, and Dr. Eleanor Evans, understanding the gravity of the circumstances, readily agreed to a complete cardiac workup. Evelyn needed irrefutable medical proof that her heart was, indeed, perfectly healthy, a direct counter to their planned heart attack narrative. That evening, Richard was unusually solicitous. He made Evelyn's favorite pasta dish, fussing over her with a tenderness that would once have warmed her heart. Now, it only amplified the cold disgust within her. "How are you feeling, my dear?" he asked, his brow furrowed with feigned concern. Still a little dizzy? Evelyn looked at him, seeing not her husband, but a predator, feigning affection while plotting her demise. A little better, actually, Evelyn replied, forcing a weak smile. Just a bit tired. She caught a fleeting flash of disappointment in his eyes, quickly masked. He had clearly expected her to be worse, perhaps even incapacitated. Well, that's good to hear, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. But still, I want you to keep that appointment with Dr. Hayes tomorrow. 10 o'clock, remember? Just to be safe. We need to get to the bottom of these dizzy spells. He insisted on it, his tone leaving no room for argument. Later, lying awake beside Richard's feigned sleep, Evelyn stared at the ceiling, her mind churning. She had set the stage, the will, the trust, the documented evidence, the secret medical appointment, all pieces in her elaborate counterplan. She knew she had created a safety net for Michael, ensuring he would be protected from their greed. A few hours later, in the dead of night, a sound stirred Evelyn from her feigned slumber. Richard was up, his voice a low murmur from the hallway. He thought she was asleep, probably believed her to be drugged. Evelyn held her breath, straining to listen. She won't take the medication. She heard him whisper urgently into the phone, his voice laced with frustration. Suspicious. She claims she's feeling better. I think we might need to accelerate. Before Christmas? Yes, definitely before Christmas. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Accelerate. Their timeline was shrinking. She was walking into the lion's den. But now, she had her own claws. The next morning, Evelyn went through the motions of her appointment with Dr. Hayes. He listened to her feigned complaints of dizziness and fatigue with a condescending air, tapping his pen on his desk. Not uncommon in women your age, Evelyn, he said, dismissing her symptoms with a wave of his hand. He then proceeded to suggest increasing her blood pressure medication and prescribed a new, mild sedative. Evelyn accepted the prescriptions with a demure nod, but as soon as she left his office, she drove directly to Dr. Eleanor Evans. At Dr. Eleanor Evans's office, the atmosphere was starkly different. Dr. Evans, having been fully briefed by Arthur, conducted a thorough cardiac workup. The results were precisely what Evelyn needed. Her heart was strong, blood pressure perfectly normal, cholesterol levels excellent. Dr. Evans looked Evelyn squarely in the eye. Mrs. Hartwell, she stated, her voice firm and professional. Medically speaking, you are in excellent health. If anything were to happen to your heart suddenly, it would be highly suspicious, given these pristine results. Evelyn felt a surge of triumph mixed with a chilling resolve. The medical alibi was secured. That evening, Evelyn presented Dr. Hayes's prescriptions to Richard. He snatched them eagerly, his eyes gleaming. Excellent, Evelyn. Now, these will have you feeling better in no time. You should take the sedative tonight. Get a good night's rest. He urged her, his voice bordering on insistence. But Evelyn, maintaining her fragile demeanor, simply demurred. Oh, Richard, I think I'll just wait a day or two, see if I feel naturally better first. You know how I dislike taking unnecessary medications. She caught the flicker of disappointment, the tightening of his jaw, a brief flash of frustration he quickly suppressed. The following day, Victoria called, her voice edged with a new, almost frantic desperation. Evelyn, darling, I was thinking, with Christmas so close, we simply must do some shopping. How about lunch afterwards? I found this absolutely adorable little bistro. Very quiet and intimate. Just us girls. It would be such fun. The choice of venue, the urgency in her tone, the intimate setting. It all screamed trap. Evelyn immediately called Arthur. They're accelerating their timeline, she told him, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. I think they're planning something for today. She relayed Victoria's invitation. Arthur's response was immediate. We need to involve the police now, Mrs. Hartwell. But Evelyn, needing that final confirmation for Michael's sake, needed a confession. After lunch, Arthur, she insisted. Let me go, I'll get the confession. And then the police. Arthur, After a moment's hesitation, reluctantly agreed, assuring her that officers would be discreetly positioned outside the restaurant. Evelyn arrived early at the bistro, a charming but indeed intimate place with tucked-away tables. She chose a strategic spot, near the back, with a clear view of the entrance but still offering a sense of privacy. A cold, grim satisfaction settled over her as Victoria walked in, her smile a little too wide, her eyes scanning the room for Evelyn. Victoria, ever the gracious hostess, immediately ordered a bottle of wine. Evelyn's preferred type, a crisp Sauvignon Blanc. Evelyn watched her with an almost detached fascination as Victoria expertly poured the wine into their glasses, her movements practiced, fluid. Evelyn knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was it. She pretended to drink, taking small, almost imperceptible sips, barely touching the liquid. After a few minutes, feigning another wave of dizziness, Evelyn excused herself to the restroom. Once safely inside a stall, she pulled out the tiny, discreet recording device Arthur had given her, activating it and speaking softly into it. "Arthur, it's happening. I'm at the Green Willow Bistro. She's definitely put something in my wine. I'm going back out there. Get ready." Arthur's voice crackled back through the earpiece she had carefully inserted. "Mrs. Hartwell, Detective Rodriguez confirms officers are in position. They're ready to move the moment you give the signal. Please be careful." 10 more minutes, Evelyn whispered, her resolve hardening. I want to hear it from her own mouth. Returning to the table, Evelyn's movements were more deliberate, less feigned. She sat down, her gaze fixed on Victoria, a cold fire in her eyes. "Victoria," she began, her voice low and steady. "How long have you been planning to kill me?" Victoria's practiced mask shattered instantly. Her eyes widened, a flicker of raw fear replacing the usual cunning. "What are you talking about, Evelyn? You're not making any sense. Are you feeling ill again?" She tried to feign concern, but her voice trembled. "Don't bother, Victoria," Evelyn said, leaning forward slightly. "I know everything. I know about Richard's gambling debts. I know about your affair. I know about the natural causes note, the poisoned wine, the accidental clause in the will. I know you've been researching poisons online. I know you've been systematically isolating Michael from me. How long has it been? 2 years, wasn't it?" Victoria's face contorted, a venomous rage replacing the fear. She hissed, "You stupid old woman. You should have just died quietly. You were supposed to be easy." She then began to unravel, her confession pouring out in a torrent of bitterness and spite. She admitted manipulating Richard, calling him pathetic and easy to manipulate because of his debts. She gleefully revealed her plan to kill Michael later, after Evelyn was gone, staging it as an accident to claim his share of the inheritance as well. As Victoria ranted, Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out the small recording device, placing it on the table. "You know, Victoria," she said, her voice clear and resonant, "I'm not a stupid old woman. And all of this has been recorded." Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she pulled open her coat, revealing a wire attached to her blouse. "The police have heard every single word." Just then, the discreet chime of the bistro's entrance bell signaled the arrival of 2 uniformed officers and Detective Rodriguez. Victoria's face went white, her jaw dropping in disbelief. Then horror. She sprang up, overturning her chair, screaming obscenities as the officers moved in to arrest her. Back at home, Richard was apprehended by Arthur and awaiting police detail. The damning evidence of his gambling debts, the forged will, and his handwritten murder plot laid out before him. Faced with irrefutable proof, he pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, receiving a sentence of 25 years. Victoria, refusing a plea bargain, was found guilty on multiple counts and sentenced to life without parole. Evelyn, with Eleanor Vance's help, broke the news to Michael. Detective Rodriguez was present, explaining the details of the investigation. Michael's face was ashen, then streaked with tears, as the full, horrifying truth sank in. He confessed, through sobs, to believing Victoria's insidious lies about Evelyn disapproving of their marriage, lies designed to drive a wedge between mother and son. Evelyn held him, forgiving him, her heart aching for the son she almost lost. With her life irrevocably changed, Evelyn sold the house that held so many painful memories. She bought a charming cottage in a quiet coastal town in Maine, a place of peace and solitude. She began to live for herself, tending her garden, painting, and enjoying the simple beauty of the ocean. Michael, now free from Victoria's manipulative grasp, rebuilt his life, finding love again with a kind and gentle woman named Sarah. They visited Evelyn often, their laughter echoing through her new home, a testament to resilience, justice, and the enduring power of a mother's love.